We're standing high above the Via Dolorosa. If you could see over this railing, you'd see that there are whole groups of pilgrims that are retracing the stations of the cross on the Via Dolorosa. Where we are in the Bible is in Isaiah 53, and let me just read a few words from which the Via Dolorosa has been named. It says in Isaiah 53 that he is a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We hid, as it were, our faces from him. This is speaking of Jesus as he headed toward the cross. It says he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace is upon him, and by his stripes we're healed. The Via Dolorosa speaks of how Jesus suffered for us. It's the way, via, of suffering, Dolorosa. It's the place of sorrows and suffering. What I'm going to do from up here, now that we've read Isaiah 52, is retrace all the events in the four Gospels that surround the death of Jesus Christ. If you, and I'll try and describe so you can see it as I point to it, if you look past this Roman Catholic yellow flag, which shows this is an official Catholic monument, the furthest object you can see is a cream-colored spire and kind of a conical lead gray dome. That is Mount Zion. You can see from where we're standing Mount Zion. Mount Zion is the place of the upper room, the Last Supper, and Jesus meeting with his disciples. So on that last night before the cross, Jesus was right there. And he went from the Last Supper, that final Passover, after he taught them, and we're in John 14, John 15, John 16, Jesus was teaching them, and then it says he got up and told them it was time to go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, if you follow me, I'm going to walk across the horizon here. We're going from Mount Zion, past that curved top Herva synagogue, past the Jewish quarter. You see the buildings going down, and then you see another big minaret, and then a gray top, that's Al-Aqsa. Keep going this way, another Station of the Cross, the Dome of the Rock. Keep going to the left, past the Austrian flag, and straight through. If you look just to the right of this giant minaret right here, all of those green trees, that is Gethsemane. You can actually see Dominus Flevit and the golden top of the Church of Gethsemane. So right there, Jesus went from the upper room, Mount Zion, walked all the way across to Gethsemane. And there, the scriptures say that he prayed. He actually was praying for us in Gethsemane. And he prayed for us who would come, John 17, and then in John 18, he is there sweating, as it were, great drops of blood when soldiers from the high priest, now think right there where the Dome of the Rock is where the temple was. And 600 soldiers and the high priests and all of their assistants took the contingent over to Gethsemane, arrested Jesus, and brought him to Caiaphas's house. And if you go back to the Herva synagogue, the white dome, right behind that is where the high priests live. And Jesus was kept there until dawn. And as soon as it was dawn, and he was kept in a prison under the high priest's house, right there by that white dome that has a little tree in front of it, then he was moved across to Pilate's residence. Pilate, the one that presided over Christ's crucifixion, lived in the palace of Herod. Now remember, Herod had died 30 years before the crucifixion of Christ. Now you say, where did Pilate live? You can see that right on the horizon. If you look, you'll see in the distance 3 Israeli flags. There are 3 flags together on top of a square fortress. That's Herod's palace. That's where Pilate lived. So Jesus was taken there, and that's where Pilate says, I don't have any jurisdiction, you send him to your own people. So they shuttled Jesus back for another mock trial, and then Pilate moves to his official residence. And his official residence, when he sat on the seat of judgment, was right beneath us, right where we're standing now. It was called the Antonian Fortress. And there, in front of Pilate, was a stone pavement, much like what I'm standing on here. It's called the Gabbatha. And Pilate declared Jesus guilty. offered them Barabbas or Jesus, and they said, "Crucify Jesus." And then Pilate had him scourged. And there in that fortress, they tied Jesus to a pole, and with this long whip with sharp glass and metal and large objects on it, on long leather strips, a Roman soldier gave him scourging. Many prisoners died during the scourging. Often during the scourging, the ribs and the bones would be exposed because the flesh was torn off. But after Jesus endured those sorrows, that's what he did for us. The Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrows, Isaiah 53, he bore our sorrows and our iniquities. But after he was scourged, he took his cross and walked to be crucified. And if you look now in the distance, you can see right under this flag, you see two gray domes. One has a big gold cross on it, and then to the right, there's another bigger gray dome, and that dome has a small cross on it. Those two gray domes beside each other, the furthest thing in the distance you can see, is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built over a quarry. It's built over a spot that was outside the walls in Christ's time. It was built in the spot where most likely crucifixions occurred. So Jesus was taken from where we are, the Antonian fortress, to the Holy Sepulchre, which was Calvary, and crucified. Now the Protestants, evangelicals like us, don't like that site, not because of archaeology, just because it doesn't look very nice, and they have chosen a different one. If you look this way, right there in front of me, over this rooftop, is a lot of little archways. That's the back side of the Damascus Gate. That is the main entrance into the city. That is a gate that goes to Damascus, as in when Paul went to Damascus and was converted. That's the main gate going to the north. And so Jesus would have gone out that gate, and behind it, when you see those trees there, is what is called the Garden Tomb, or Gordon's Calvary, or Golgotha, which is right now over in those green trees. So Jesus was either crucified out that Damascus gate, or he was crucified out a similar gate that is between us and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But Jesus was taken, crucified, and buried. There are first century burial spots there, and there's a similar burial spot in the Garden Tomb. Then what happened? Resurrection morning. Jesus stepped from the tomb, met with his disciples where? Go back across behind this area, right over this tree, the upper room on Mount Zion. Jesus came to that place where the disciples were hiding out. They were behind locked doors, scared to death, and Jesus came and walked through the door and showed himself alive to them. He stayed with them for 40 days. And then, the last thing I'd like to show you is directly this way. If you follow the horizon and go from the upper room, it's the same way Jesus went on the night of the Last Supper in Gethsemane, but right between this close minaret and that gray, black, cross-covered church dome right there, between the two is a church spire. That spire is actually the Church of the Ascension. And if you look there, that is the spot where Jesus went, brought his disciples, spoke with them the last time. In Acts chapter 1, it says that he began to bless his disciples. So look at that tall church spire, and right there on that spot, Jesus was standing, blessing his disciples, and it says this in Acts chapter 1, which is one of the most beautiful scenes of Christ's ministry. It says, "And while he continued to bless them, they were looking on him, and as they watched," and Luke 24 adds, he continued to bless them, it says, "he began to rise and was taken up out of their sight." So Jesus was standing, looking at each of the disciples, saying, "I'm going now to my Father, I'm leaving the Comforter, I have taught you, go into all the world." And as he was looking down at his disciples, he began to rise up, and he began to ascend to heaven right from where that church spire is. And it says that they were standing there looking up into the clouds, and then they heard a voice behind them. And the voice were two men standing by them in white apparel, angels. And they said, You men of Galilee, I'm in Acts 1:11, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven. And it says they returned from the mount called Olivet all the way across to the upper room. And so in this one little sweep, you can see where Jesus celebrated the Last Supper, where Jesus was taken before Pilate, where Jesus right here was beaten, where Jesus was taken to be crucified at the Holy Sepulchre right there, or up there at Gordon's Calvary, where Jesus was taken afterward and buried. Then he rises and goes to the upper room, shows himself to the disciples, stays with them 40 days, and then rises into heaven from the Mount of Olives. All of the biblical panorama of what Jesus did here for us, suffering on the Via Dolorosa, suffering crucifixion on the cross, and then risen, conquering, and rising to heaven. What a blessing to be right here in the land of the book.